People who work in law enforcement, what is work like right now? Been on the job for a few months now in a liberal beach town. Beginning was weird because of COVID, not many radio calls and little proactive enforcement. Since George Floyd's murder, things were really tense in the beginning. My department has treated the protest as more of a parade and let the protesters exercise their First Amendment right. A few broken windows here and there, but nothing big. A lot of talk within my department, and so far my chief has decided to do away with the carotid restraint. I'm sure more change is coming, but hopefully they start to change the hiring process in terms of multiple psych evals and begin to fire people for gross misconduct and are openly being a bigot. We've been 12 on/12 off for the last week. Due to how tame everything has been, we just went back to our normal work schedule. Edit, work schedule. Good to hear you're handling it that way. The MPD was insanely violent for days before a single window was broken. The MPD hands down incited riots in MN. It's good to see other places are learning from their mistakes. Facebook friend is a cop. They gave him 24 hours off yesterday. Before that he put in 100 hours in 7 days. He pretty much slept through his day off. Yep, my brother's a cop. Has worked 20+ hour days in the past week. For a position that requires a level head, making someone work that many hours seems like sabotage. Tell that to the doctors doing 48-hour on-call shifts at the hospital. Right. It's tragic and dangerous that the people we rely on for our health and safety are worked to exhaustion. We're shooting ourselves in the foot. They do this for a reason. Studies have found that most mistakes are made with patient handoff between doctors. In order to minimize the patient handoffs at critical times, the doctor's shift is extended. They have to balance the staff being overtired with miscommunications and mix-ups that happen with a change in staff. I wonder how many are considering new career paths. I was considering becoming a policeman as a backup plan. Having studied systemic racism, cop culture, and multiple flaws of the police system for the past year, I was confident the awareness brought by my university program would allow those who would join the police to be better than the current ones. However, I am kinda worried about the social etiquette that'll come with joining the ranks now. Good thing it's a backup plan, I guess. That's a huge issue. The few good ones cannot whistleblow without their lives being destroyed, and the bad cops they try to whistleblow on end up with a slap on the wrist at best. Yeah, cop culture is a very complex subject. It's possible these protests might reinforce its toxicity, but at the same time, they're necessary and they might lead to a reformed police system that can deal with these issues. Fingers crossed. I'm a police officer in a town in the middle of England. It feels pretty detached from what's happening in America, or even what's happening in London. We had protests over Saturday and Sunday, but there was very little overt police presence in what I think was a deliberate act by our chief constable. As an organization, we've more or less said that we stand beside the protesters, but we will have to take action if there is violence. In the UK, we police by consent, so the police need to imbue a sense of trust in what they do, otherwise it wouldn't work. There's always a small minority in any protest that appears to only be there to cause problems, or is looking for a fight with the police, or with other protesters, but by and large the vast majority of protesters where I am seem to be there for the right reasons. Work for me has more or less carried on as normal up to this point, but if the UK is put through a second wave of COVID-19, and there is still civil unrest around the BLM movement, I think we might start struggling to police the way we have been. American living in England for the past 5 years here. Thanks for your comment. I've been wondering what UK cops thought about what's going on in my country. I love the way policing is done here. Yes, there are bad cops here too, but the whole policing by consent practice makes people here feel much more like the police are a force for good. I was really struck when I started living here by how English cops seem to approach situations calm, working intelligently and rationally. I'm so used to seeing cops behave like raging bullies in the USA that the difference was amazing. My first month here, a man was acting up in the parking lot of a grocery store. Seemed drunk/drugged out, maybe mentally ill, maybe all of those things. He was yelling at people, throwing things around. The cops came. I braced myself for what I've seen happen in the USA, more often than not. Guns drawn, screaming, throw the guy on the ground, hit him a few times, cuff, throw him in the cruiser. But the English cops who showed up actually took some time to talk the guy down, explained calmly why people were freaked out by his behavior, and offered him some options about what could happen next. They could take him to a hospital to get a psych eval, or they could call a relative, etc. One of them went into the store and bought the guy a bottle of water and a sack of Wotsits. I was blown away. The guy calmed down, decided he probably needed the psych eval, and went with them happily enough. It's one of the biggest differences living here. When I see cops in my rear view, I don't tense up. Anyway, thanks. Where I'm at, there's been plenty of protests, and I've not had a day off in over a week now. But honestly, the protesters here have been respectful, well-mannered, and honestly a great representation of how things should be. I've had great conversations with them and think some good came of it. Sure, I had one or two get in my face screaming and such, but it really didn't bother me cause of the above paragraph. I'd say, from my experience, most people aren't anti-cop per se. They are anti-excessive force and violation of rights. And I'm with them. Protest the shit out of it. There is a need for change and I'm ready for it. Help me get these knuckle draggers out so we can all have better days. Edit. I received a lot of feedback about this post, overwhelmingly positive. I appreciate the accolades and everything. I just wanted to take a moment to say I'm not alone. I've had amazing role models in this career who kept me down a good path so far. I really hope we can make these changes peacefully. Enough blood has been shed and enough damage has been done. My cousin is in an outer suburb of Minneapolis and he just became a cop. He said Friday night, when the protests and riots were happening, when he worked was the hardest night of his life. The chief officer said he hadn't seen anything like this in the past 18 years he served there. A friend of mine is in the army and she said she's been on active duty this entire time and it's been super long for her. I witnessed the effects of the riots firsthand and it's crazy. I don't think this city has ever seen something like this in most people's lifetimes, maybe in the past, but not the current generations. My dad grew up in Minneapolis, not far from where Floyd was murdered, and he says that there wasn't anything like this in the 60s there. As in, the 60s were better or worse? The 60s were definitely worse, at least for Detroit. To put it in perspective, from two opposite perspectives. I knew while I was growing up his dad was a firefighter during the riots at the end of the 60s. There was an old, dirty axe in his basement with notches and dings on it. The kids asked his dad why he kept such a beat-up axe. His father told him that it was Siemens and that it got its damage from breaking in skulls. Then, when I was at college, I elected to move out of student housing and into a 13-unit apartment building that was built in the early 1900s. Anyway, most of my neighbors and I quickly became friends because we all were people who knew what it was to get along and make the best of what you've got. One of my neighbors was a former Panther from the Roids and he would tell a story now and again about shooting cops during the Roids. Bam! Smith & Wesson sent him straight to the School of Mortuary Science. The interesting thing, to me, was that generally no one ever talked about them. There were no history classes that covered them and the generations that were around for them all, generally, seemed to try to forget about it. And back then, before the internet really existed, the only places to learn about it would be libraries or museums, although the latter didn't really get in depth and the former required one to really do done digging. But if you knew someone who lived through them and was willing to talk about it, like I did, it was quickly apparent that live ammunition was used, frequently, by both sides. So, yeah. Worse, here's a half-hour documentary about the '68 riots. There were other riots, but this was the easiest to provide. On the job 8 years, 5 in my current place, 3 as a detective. Work is fine. Our local communities went out and protested. We were out there to support them. We didn't have any rioting or looting. I wish all places could say the same. Genuinely curious, a lot of the protesters are calling for a reform of police structure by breaking up the police into different sectors, social workers going out for domestic issues, specialized workers for situations like homeless people, etc. In a small town area this would be different, probably done in the same way the fire department doubles up as EMT workers. Do you think that would help work in your area? Excellent question. Most of my region has volunteer EMT and firefighters, most of which are spread quite thin as it is. I'd feel more comfortable with well-trained officers responding to initial calls, then referring out to the appropriate department. We have strong domestic violence support groups in the area, as well as a very proactive homeless outreach. But in terms of responding to calls, the police, when properly trained and made aware of their resources, have the edge. The unfortunate truth is that those agencies don't go there for something in progress because a lot of them are tumultuous at best. The reason a domestic gets bad enough to necessitate police intervention is usually because things have hit a boiling point and a call is made. A lot of times, that's because a crime has committed. If I'm responding to an active domestic incident, I have an obligation to the victim. Removing the aggressor is paramount. I'm equipped and trained to do that. But I'm also obligated to tend to the needs of the victim. On scene, I'm ensuring that the victim is put immediately in contact with a group that specializes in that. They're staffed with women who have been through it all, and can speak to a victim in a way that I will never be able to. They can give them the resources that I can't, and they can make them feel safe and empowered in a way I can't. Being a good cop doesn't mean you can do everything. It means you have a proper system set up to allow people who do things best to do them. Same thing with a homeless call. If the police need to be there, then we need to be there. As we all know, homelessness goes hand in hand with mental illness. I'm responding to that incident with that knowledge. I can use my training and skill set to recognize that and deal with it appropriately. Cop for 25 years. Firearms instructor for about 20. Field training officer for over 12. About 70 cops total passed through my training car. Been in investigations for about a year now. Grateful for the level-headed, generally laid-back county I live and work in. I would say we are diverse, but admittedly the majority of that diversity is a very strong Hispanic population. Our citizens, and I include cops in that category, are outraged by what they see, and rightfully want to voice that. Toward us, people are supportive and understanding, and at the same time sad, as am I. I have Gen Z teenagers that are with me every other weekend. The weekend after Mr. George was killed, my sons asked what I thought, and what I'd have done if I saw that happening while off duty. I explained without hesitation that I'd have done what I've always preached: put a bully in his place. I swear I've answered the "why are you getting into law enforcement" question with that countless times. I'd have badged my way close to where those bullies were killing that man and laid the one on his neck the fuck out before the rest had time to react. I'm not the baddest man on the planet, but I'm not small and I've been around. If I'd have caught a beating or trouble with my department for acting my mind, so be it. Wouldn't be the first time. Defense of the life of another. That's like lesson fucking one, for fuck's sake. I will say, for what it's worth, I've worked hand in hand with a couple thousand cops, throughout my time, and I've never firsthand seen the things I'm seeing these fuckheads do. They don't deserve the badge or the position of public trust it represents. So how's work, OP? I love my current job and my overall career, am grateful the lessons I've learned, and the chance to, literally, save a few lives. I work with an amazing contingent of like-minded individuals that would lay down their lives in the defense of others. All that said, I can't help but feel the blight of shame that these pretenders have put on us. If by some weird Spider-Verse dimensional shift I found myself working next to some of the asshole bullies I've seen videos of, pretty sure I'd be on suspension for putting them in their place. All I can do is be honest with my sons and community members who value my opinion, train new deputies to listen to people and be creative in their problem solving, and explain to them that may come with baring your soul every now and then. I've always stressed teaching knowing when to fight, but more importantly knowing when not to. And if things do go south, knowing when it's done. I will continue to treat people with the respect they deserve and help people through tough times, because their tough times are peppered sporadically through their lifetimes, but I've been part of people's tough times for 2.5 decades. I chose this mantle willingly. I've been a cop almost my entire adult life, but I was still a caring human first, and that's no different than most anyone. Police officers, tell us your life stories in the comments, it will be interesting to read. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day, everyone.